Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk about the problem of airline pilots. All right, airline pilots, airline flight crew members who are struggling with mental issues. Okay, this could involve mental illness like anxiety, depression, or it can involve, let's say, mental condition, like, say, struggling with alcohol, struggling with behavioral control, struggling with anger management, or possibly just having a lot of stress in the family, like, say, the death of a loved one. Let's say a child is going through problems, or like, say, just personal problems. Doesn't rise to the level of mental illness, but it still affects mental fitness. Okay. And I mean, I just want to, let's just be very honest. I think we may be forgetting, maybe because of the pilot shortage, maybe because we think of maybe aviation, maybe being an airline pilot has become such a high class, like a upper middle class, just very white collar job. Just so high paid, and I guess we have the illusion that aviation is maybe safer than it really is. Okay. And so I guess there's this illusion that it's just a very high paying career, and it's really kind of hard to remember in such a high paid environment, in such a, I guess, a posh, kind of a posh environment. It's hard to remember that things can go wrong very quickly in an airplane. Okay. And that, let's say, a disaster, like, say, a runway disaster at an airport involving maybe two or more airplanes, right? That could result in terrible, terribly deadly. That could result in a lot of deaths, and could be, really, really just a catastrophe. And so it's kind of hard to remember, because airline flying is so comfortable, and it feels so safe, and it's so high paying, that I think I guess mentally, it's hard to remember. It's hard to remind ourselves how critical and dangerous it really is. And lately, I mean, we do see these incidents where, let's say, pilots show up with a blood alcohol level. Maybe they've been drinking the night before, and they're not thinking carefully. They're not being careful enough, and they're maybe taking the chance of showing up in the morning, and they still have a blood alcohol level from the night before. And that happens pretty regularly. We've had a couple of incidents where one pilot, a captain, took off his clothes, masturbated, watched pornography while the airplane was flying with a female first officer, right? And I'm not going to comment on whether that degraded the safety of the flight, but what I think it shows is that you have a pilot who has a behavioral control issue. Okay, impulse control, and that's a pretty serious behavioral problem to have if you're going to be entrusted with, the lives of hundreds of people in your fingertips. I think that's pretty serious. Very, very similar. I just did some research last night, and I read about another Alaska captain who just a couple of years ago was on a flight with a first officer, a female first officer, and they're having conversations. And in the course of I guess they were staying at a hotel, and apparently, at least the allegation is that the captain drugged this first officer and had sex with her. Okay. And I mean, gosh, if you felt so comfortable doing that with that particular first officer, my question is whether he had done that in the past, right? And so the real question is, behavioral control, right? And it's the same behavioral control, that lack of behavioral control, that allows somebody who has a doubt about their, let's say, their blood alcohol level, and then they just show up anyway the next morning, taking a chance. Hey, maybe my blood alcohol level is legal, but right, not knowing, right? And so that, to me, is behavioral control. Okay. By the same token, and this is related, if you are struggling with a depression, right, that decision to keep flying, okay, that is the same thing as somebody who may have a blood alcohol level from the night before, and they just decide to keep working, to go and show up to work, even though they don't know if they're really safe, right? The same thing goes for somebody who has let's say, a depression. They know they're struggling with depression, and they knowingly show up to work. Okay, that decision, that lack of behavioral control, to intentionally show up to work when you know you're struggling with an anxiety or depression. Okay, that to me is the same as somebody who has, let's say, drunk too much the night before, had too much to drink, and then the next morning, when they don't really know if they're completely sober, they may feel pretty sober, but they don't know if they're 100%, and then they just roll the dice and show up to work anyway. To me, that's that same lack of control. same lack of being cautious, having good judgment, right? And so why do I raise all these issues about behavioral control and judgment? Because what I've seen lately, right? And by the way, there's a lot of ways to have an aircraft accident. If you have the best pilots in the world, I mean the best pilots in the world, an airplane can still crash if the wrong things happen. You can have like a severe hydraulic failure. You could have a severe, let's say, flight control problem, where no crew in the world could save the aircraft. Like that Alaska aircraft, that Alaska MD-80, right? It was an Alaska MD-80 in the late 90s that had a jack screw fail on their stab trim. There's a stabilizer trim, right? And basically the stabilizer went to like full down deflection. Okay. And there's nothing that anybody could do to save that aircraft. They tried going inverted, but there was no way they could save that plane. So there's a lot of different, and also the Boeing 737s have had those rudder hardovers. So there's certain flight control issues that can bring down any airplane with any crew, right? So, flying is going to have an element of risk regardless of how good the pilots are, right? But what I'm seeing lately are preventable accidents. I'm seeing a lot of preventable accidents in airport and runway environments where you have loss of separation, or you have people misunderstanding or believing they have a runway crossing instruction when in fact they weren't instructed to cross where they do cross, right? So they're potentially they have like a runway incursion where maybe another airplane is active on that runway. And so those are situations that could result in major accidents. And those are, I think, more preventable, let's say, than a flight control emergency, or like an in-flight upset where the aircraft, is just loses complete control, and even the best pilots couldn't recover that, right? So we're seeing a lot of accidents, I think, where you're seeing mistakes get made or judgment errors in accepting, let's say, a bad clearance from ATC, where the ATC gives a clearance that maybe is not in the best judgment, or maybe the crew is not really ready for such a tight clearance. Like say another aircraft is on short final and you're cleared for like a expedited departure, right? But let's say the crew is just not ready and just doesn't have the full picture of where the other aircraft is, and mentally they're just not ready to accept that clearance, even if it's a legal clearance. Or worse, maybe a crew gets a bad clearance, but they don't have the extra situational awareness to recognize that they've been cleared to do something that probably isn't a good idea. So I'm seeing a lot of things like that. I'm also seeing a lot of incidents where, and then there's also crossing runways. You think you got a clearance, or even if you get a clearance, you don't have the full situational awareness to realize that the crossing runway is active and there may be a problem, even though you've been given a clearance, or you think you've been given a clearance, right? The other is on go-arounds or on instrument departures, or regular instrument departures, where you may believe that you have a clearance that has you crossing an active parallel runway path, right? And it may be a good clearance, you don't know. But I think that any good crew member, any alert, reasonable crew member, whenever they have what they believe to be a clearance, okay, that involves crossing the path of another active runway, they just double check, just make sure it's a good clearance, make sure they didn't misunderstand, just little things like that, or at least being aware of what's happening on that parallel runway and not accidentally having a lack of separation, maybe with another aircraft. So, I'm seeing a lot of, I would say, runway airport environment incidents that involve either mistakes or lack of situational awareness. So I put that in the category of mental fitness. Okay, so, and that's a lot of fitness. In other words, we're expecting pilots to be extra alert. That may involve monitoring more than one radio frequency. Okay, that may require air crew to have, I would say, extra attention, be extra sharp, not just sober, not just lacking depression, not just not having anxiety, but being extra sharp, being on your A game, And I'm afraid that we're now setting the standard way below the A game, and now we're just arguing over whether it's okay to be depressed and have anxiety. I mean, I don't know. I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think mental fitness is already an issue in terms of just being at our best, having our best attention, let's say in a runway environment, in an airport environment. And I guess the way I look at it, I'm happy to have the conversation. And I think pilots should have the guts and the integrity not to let themselves put lives in danger, okay, if they are not sure about their mental fitness, not their mental health, but their mental fitness. Like, am I an athlete of the mind? Am I ready to be extraordinary, have extraordinary attention, extraordinary performance, mental performance? And if there's any doubt about that, people ought to be self-disqualifying, but I mean, we have a pilot shortage, and also, flying has become so lucrative. It's become so lucrative that if somebody has invested more than $100,000 in their training, and they've invested decades of their life, to have a career, and they don't have any fallback career, and what are they going to fall back to be a teacher in a high school after making $230,000 as a captain, airline captain? I mean, the economics don't really favor people, being honest with themselves, if they don't really have full, I guess, athlete level mental fitness. Okay, so what do I see? I mean, based on what I've seen in the last couple of years with all these runway incidents, these airport environment incidents, these lack of separation, I'll tell you what I see. It's just a matter of statistics. Okay, we just had a collision between two business jets at Houston Hobby. Where one aircraft thought they got an instruction to take off, when another aircraft was landing on the crossing runway. Okay, and then just a few months earlier, we had a Learjet in Boston that thought he had a takeoff clearance, when then he ended up having a conflict with a JetBlue that was landing on a crossing runway. Okay, so you combine that with all the lack of separation incidents we've seen with airplanes that are cleared to taxi into position and depart when there's another aircraft on short final or coming into short final. Okay, and I think what I'm seeing statistically is that we may have an incident where you have two airliners collide, at an airport, in a runway airport environment, either a low level midair or a runway intersection or a runway collision. And that would be very similar to the US Air crash at LAX in 1991. Okay, and that was just by luck. It involved a 737 with a smaller commuter aircraft. Okay, but still, it was a real crash, and a lot of people got killed. Okay, and so we may end up with a very embarrassing incident where maybe two large aircraft collide at an airport like O'Hare or JFK or whatever, or San Francisco, and we'll see something very embarrassing involving two large aircraft and a lot of dead people. And then what? We'll find out that maybe one of the pilots had problems with their domestic problems at home, or had a difficult divorce. We maybe find other pilot had psych medication in their bloodstream. I mean, and then big debates about mental health and pilots. So I guess I don't know that there's much to say about it, because we do have a pilot shortage. Okay, so I think it's almost inevitable that just because of how well pilots are paid and how they don't want to let go of these very, very high paying jobs, I think economically there's not a lot of incentive, I think, for any changes to be made right now. Or if any changes get made right now, just very, very cosmetic changes, very superficial. And no matter how many pilots today are actually coming clean with their issues, there's probably a whole other percentage of pilots who don't ever want to talk about their personal issues or their degraded attention, or let's say maybe some people don't have the best fitness. Maybe they're not depressed. Maybe they don't have anxiety, but they don't really have the best fitness. Maybe some pilots are just complacent, and they forgot and they've lost touch with how dangerous it is around an airport environment. And so maybe it's sort of a chronic problem where pilots just don't have their A game. They don't have that full sharpness, that full fitness. And even their attitude is really not given to the best mental performance, especially, like I said, like in a runway taxi runway airport environment, where there could be, a lot of potential for, let's say, getting onto an active runway without the right clearance, or accepting a bad clearance from ATC and getting onto a runway where they should know better that, that runway is actually active. Okay, and then having a collision on a runway, or a low-level midair collision near an airport. So that's what I see is likely to happen. And so, as far as what we can do about it, well, we have the pilot shortage. So basically, airlines right now are getting the best they can get from the regionals, right? From the regional carriers. But the regionals are now having to take younger captains and very inexperienced, like barely inexperienced first officers, right? So I guess what I see is, let's look at where you have the least experience, which would be things like fractional, like business jets, like regional airlines, that kind of thing, and then maybe like say airlines that may have, let's say, a bad combination of a captain who's maybe not having his best day, and maybe a very young first officer. Okay, so all that inexperience combined with, like, say, maybe a little bit of complacency, and you could see something like what happened at JFK earlier this year, where you had a 777, an American Airlines 777, that was given a very quick but very routine taxi instruction to taxi to, I can't remember the runway, but they were given a runway they were given a taxi clearance to taxi to one runway that were, sorry, oh my god, dogs, sorry about my neighbor's dogs. Anyway, they were given a taxi clearance that involved them crossing a runway, but crossing an inactive runway, to allow them to get into position for an active runway. I think it was, they had to cross runway 31 to get in position to take off on runway 4, I think it was. I don't know. Anyway, bottom line is that they were given a clearance that would involve crossing a non-active runway to allow them to get to the end of an active runway. Okay. And I guess confusion, maybe they don't have their A game. They're not scrupulously, religiously, really taking seriously the reading of their taxiway map. Okay, and they end up confused, the entire crew, and it's actually 3 pilots because they have a backup pilot, okay, sitting in the jump seat. And this flight that's on its way to London with full fuel and passengers, right? They end up crossing the wrong runway, okay, and they end up crossing that wrong runway, believing they're crossing a different runway, while a Delta is at 100 knots taking off, okay, and it was just seconds away from being a super deadly incident, right? And if this had happened just with a little bit different timing, if the Delta had started rolling just a few seconds earlier, okay, just a few seconds earlier, okay, this could have been a complete disaster, okay, which would have killed everybody on board the 777 probably, and probably everybody on board the Delta 737. Okay, that Delta 737, I think it was flying to the Caribbean, so they probably had quite a bit of fuel on board. So just looking at all the fuel on board both aircraft, I would say we would be looking at potentially, like, say, more than 300 deaths, right? 300 major fatality. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that I'm concerned about, and I guess. What do we do about it? I mean, how do you deal with the fact that we have a pilot shortage, and at the same time, flying is such a lucrative career, such a coveted career? Okay, there's just no incentive for people to come forward with their issues. And there's probably a lot of incentive for people to fly, while they don't have their best mental health, while they don't have their best physical health, or let's say they don't have their best mental fitness. Let's say maybe they're not mentally ill, but they just have problems at home. So that's what I see. Okay. And so, like, I mean, I feel like an idiot. Like, what can we do about it? I mean, come on, that's a major problem. You can't fight economics. Economics is bigger than all of us, right? So I don't personally see any big way out of this, right? Except just for urging pilots to try to just to be on their best A game, just to try to wake up and try to shake the complacency out of themselves, just try to be as aware as they can be. But as far as, like, the issue of what are we going to do about all the pilots that have depression, what are we going to do about all the pilots that have anxiety, I honestly don't think there's any magic solution. I think the pilot shortage is a big part of that. And so I think, whether we like it or not, we're going to go through a period where flying is going to have maybe more risk than it should have, and there's probably nothing we can do about it, except just ask pilots to be on their best A game, and ask airlines to ask their pilots to be on their best A game, and to whatever. Just, we have to ask for the best and just hope for the best, because there will be more mistakes made, and there will be more close calls at airports, and I just don't know what we can do, and, like, now what could we do, like, in an ideal world, frankly, I think I don't know. I think we need more people getting into aviation, more young people getting into aviation. Somehow we need to make aviation more attractive to young people who may have the extraordinary skills and the extraordinary mental fitness to be a pilot. If we have more people getting into aviation somehow, I don't know how we're going to do it, but if we could have more people getting into aviation, I think then I think airlines can be more selective. Okay, and I think airlines can afford to be more strict, and more. I'm sorry to say, harsher with pilots who don't meet mental fitness standards, and maybe air crews can be more vigilant for other crew members who really don't seem to have the fitness level that's required, to operate safely. So, but none of that can happen if we have a pilot shortage, right? So we have to do something to make aviation more attractive to high quality young people, and I mean, and the other thing too, like I think sometimes we make the mistake of not reminding ourselves that you don't have to go straight into aviation to figure out that you might be a good pilot, right? A good area that I think a lot of good pilots come out of is racing motorcycles, like a motocross. Maybe people who don't have the finances to get into aviation right away, but maybe they're good mechanics, right? They're good mechanics. They're good with motorcycles. I think the combination of motorcycles and mechanics, I think that's a very good pool to get started, and then just select from that pool, or pools like it. Maybe people who are good at athletics, people who are very good at like spatial orientation, maybe people in the military who are exceptional, and just kind of have a way of identifying those people who, let's say in the military, or let's say in the civilian world, who are good with mechanics, maybe good with motorcycles. Just kind of, if we can find a way of selecting which of those people has sort of like the intellect, and let's say the spatial orientation, and let's say maybe the almost like trigonometry and sense of like meteorology and just understanding weather in 3 dimensions, and just the maturity, who might be very good candidates to be pilots, right? So I think, if we really want to solve this problem, I think in the end it's a recruiting logistics, right? Finding and recruiting and motivating people who are in areas that are likely to produce people that have the talent to be good pilots. But until we get there, I think for now, unfortunately, and I wish I always want to come up with a solution. I always want to imagine a solution, but I think for now, I think we're kind of stuck with what we got. And I think my prediction, I'm not happy to predict it, but I think we may see. I hope not, but I think we may see a collision of 2 large aircraft, like say at a large airport, either a low-level mid-air collision or a runway collision that's not unlike the LAX disaster we saw in 1991 with US Air, something like that. I mean, I don't want that to happen, but what we saw with JFK, with that American Airlines 777 and the Boeing, the Delta 737, where the 777 actually, mistakenly crossed the wrong runway while another aircraft was taking off. That right there looks like the scenario that we may see, and I hope not, but that's, I think that's what may happen. Okay, and I just hope, even by saying that, I hope that that's just one little spark that makes people scared enough, flight crews, that they can just be paying extra attention, and just hopefully what I said never comes true. But unfortunately, I think that's the risk we're dealing with, and I don't see any immediate solution. Okay, now looking in the future, we have to look at recruitment and intelligent recruitment, finding a way to identify the best people to get into aviation, and finding ways to facilitate them or to motivate them to do what it takes to get through flight training, which is very challenging, okay, financially challenging, right? So, if we want to see any long-term solution, I think we have to look at intelligent recruitment, really identifying who are the people that would be, like, say, the athletes, the mental athletes, and who have that intelligence and the coordination, fine motor skills, and just identifying people who would make really good pilots. So, but for now, I think we have a pilot shortage with no immediate solution. And this idea of, okay, well, so then, should we just allow pilots to fly with mental illnesses, fly with psychotropic medication? Should I be taking antidepressants and flying an airplane? I think I don't know I don't like that. But the bigger question is, let's get off the table this idea of, oh, am I mentally ill? Do I have a mental condition? Let's get on the table a higher level of mental fitness. Flight crews should be operating at their top A game of, I think, a mental alertness, mental attention. And I think the standard should be way above just not having an illness. I think the standard should be, extraordinary sharpness. And if you feel like you don't have that, I think people ought to have the guts to say that today I'm not fit to fly, and just to have, I guess, the integrity to do what a lot of pilots don't do when they've been drinking the night before, and they just, they roll the dice and they show up with a blood alcohol level. Well, the same thing, if you're having a big problem at home, or you're having personal problems, or you're just not feeling confident, there has to be a way to identify that I am not at my best. And maybe techniques of meditation, maybe there should be like support groups of pilots where they learn how to bring out their best even when they're not feeling good. But these are things that don't exist today. But we need to address these issues, because the real thing that's going to kill us is not whether someone has anxiety or depression, but it's even if somebody is not at their top level of attention, and really solid with their judgment. So it's way above whether you're mentally ill. This is like, a question of whether you have the fitness, the extraordinary fitness is required to safely operate an aircraft. So that's my opinion, and I appreciate your patience. Thanks for watching.